Hare Krishna. Hello and welcome to everybody to this web-based discussion forum, which we have started to discuss about the various present-day problems and how some of this traditional outlook might be able to have some solutions for the modern-day problems. And this seminar or webinar, as we can call it, has been titled as India is Still India. And today we are going to have a special guest in our program. And I take this opportunity to welcome Mr. Bharat Trivedi. Hello, sir. Welcome to the program.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And just to give a small introduction about Mr. Bharat, he's actually an Australian citizen. He was born and brought up in India. He migrated back to Australia. He's actually a chartered accountant, a professional chartered accountant by profession. And he shifted back to Australia and he worked for many companies. In fact, he headed a lot of companies, I would say, as a CEO and CFO positions for multiple companies. And he has been around there in Australia for very many years. And being a citizen of Australia now, he has come back to India and he has started some projects, which I felt when I had a discussion with him the other day, I felt that he would add much value to our program. Projects based on rural economy, to develop some rural economies or to develop some traditional methodologies, how the rural-based economies were flourishing in those days. So that he has done. So he has a lot of perspective on various things which we have presented in the last two sessions. And so today we are very fortunate to have him in our program. First thing which I want to ask you is, how do you perceive the entire mindset of people when they want to migrate from India to any of the Western world in the name of having a better career or a lucrative living opportunity or standard of life or something which people generally put forward? What is your perspective on this, and how generally people today are having the craze to shift to some of the Western countries?
First of all, thank you for the kind introduction and your kind words. There are a few competing, I guess, interests when people migrate outside of India. I think the first one which comes to my mind is the reservation system in India, especially after independence of India. The way the political system and the social system have developed in India is that they have developed on hate of the upper castes of India. If you look at the narrative of pretty much every mainstream party, there is some element of a kind of a disgust or an issue with the higher castes of India. And this has been then flamed by the Indian film industry, Bollywood. You can see that. The left-leaning intellectuals, they have been very vocal about this, especially when they take up these Dalit rights and so-called other rights. And I'll get into a little bit more detail as to how this is simply cheating the general populace. The way the psyche has been developed over the years is that the higher castes of India were the real villains, or are the real villains, and they continue to be the real villains. Apparently, this is a very incorrect way of looking at things. And I, for a minute, I'm not saying that atrocities haven't been done by people of higher caste towards people in lower castes, but it is the same in the Western countries where a certain migrant community, if they arrive before another migrant community, they are treated very poorly. And we can get into the details of these things, and I can tell you, especially looking at America, Britain, where most Indians try to migrate, and even Australia, where I migrated, where the society is not actually equal. The society is still divided into castes, and the division will always be there. That division cannot be removed. regardless of what modern ideas we bring to it, because we are all different. I thought that the opportunity wasn't there. Now, what happens is then this reservation system then translates into poor selection, because then the selection is not on merit, the selection is only based on someone's birth, which means that we have removed one kind of birth based system, which is very commonly called the Jati Pratha in India,
Yes.
or the caste system as the British translated it,
Mm.
into something which is another caste based system, which is mandated by the government now. There have been benefits to people, and then there are obviously beneficiaries of any system in the material world, where there are always winners and losers. But the Vedic system was based on merit. So regardless of where you were born, how you were born, to whom you were born, you would always have the opportunity to succeed or to go further. But there was also the understanding that if you are born into a certain sect or a class, that is also dependent on your previous life's work. And we can get into that when we talk
Yeah.
about karma and how karma actually works. Um, so that was, I think that was the first reason
Mm.
why I thought India wasn't appealing to me just
Mm-hmm.
right off the bat. Because if you look at, I was an average student, and in
Mm-hmm.
India, if I want to get into any kind of medical school or engineering school or anything,
Mm.
my father would have had to give, either he would have had to be very rich to give uh, donation, because I was an average student. So for me, I thought the doors were closing on me. And then I looked at it from an investment perspective. So I thought, okay, if I spend, at that time, I think I spent 11 lakh rupees. And I was looking at the return on investment. So if I invest 11 lakh rupees in Australia, which was roughly $20,000 at that time, um, I could actually earn back in multiples
That's
of
true.
it. But in India, if I spent 11 lakh rupees, I could hardly get a 1% return just on the education. So that's something that needs to be understood, and that was one of my logic of doing that.
So if I under
The
yeah.
Yeah, go ahead,
So
sir.
if I understand you correctly, what you're saying is that it's about a perspective that has been created, a mindset that has been created among the Indians that the Western things are much more lucrative or looking greener, as they say, the grass is greener the other side. And the people who are actually capable, when you said that you are a average student, I was thinking immediately that you have made actually success in your life, in your career, and you have successfully run many companies in Australia. When you told me when we were discussing about the business which we are doing there, so
Yes.
definitely, which means that there is a brain drain, which they call it, and India on
Hmm.
the longer run lose people like you. I mean, the objective of this program also is to bring out the perspective that what is that India is lacking. The point which you made is very nice, that the reservation system, which actually was the need of the hour, maybe at the start of the, I mean, immediately after independence. But is that still the solution for many of this caste-based problem? Has caste actually gone out of our system? And that's one thing which we have to think about. I also thought when you said that even in an Western community or Western place, where like in America or in UK, today this white supremacy is a big, I would say, class system. I said it's a class system.
I would slightly disagree with that line of thinking.
Hmm.
One of the good things about the Western society
Yes.
in the last, I should say, 30 years,
Hmm.
maybe prior to that, I don't have experience and I cannot vouch for it, but the people I worked with,
Hmm.
see, one of the things which will always happen,
Mm.
and because it is, and it cannot be taken away unless you are a completely enlightened soul, is that people will judge you by how you look.
That's
And
true.
people are scared by people who either don't speak like them,
Mm.
don't look like them, don't sound like them, or are not from the same area. So some discrimination will be there, but it's not that it is not in India. See, that is the point I'm trying to bring out, that the problems which we see in India are the same as they are in the West. There are some things in the West which are better than in India. There are some things which are very, very bad. We have to, as intelligent people, we have to navigate and save ourselves from the ills and take what is good. So people migrate to the Western world not only for a lifestyle, but also for financial security.
That's true.
Now, as I said, that in India, because of this perpetual degradation, we are in a position where in India we were the, we were called the Sone ki Chidiya, which essentially means the golden bird, and our country was looted ad nauseum over hundreds of years and maybe perhaps thousands of years by people inside of the country and people outside of the country. What has happened in the last 70 years is that there has been a systemic propaganda by the erstwhile governments of India, the intellectual class, I mentioned Bollywood previously, them, and the mainstream media. And they have been driven by a certain ideology. There is, I don't know if I should get into names, but there is a lady called Rana Safwa.
Mhm.
And this lady, she has been caught with her lies multiple times. But because she's supported by a set of individuals within the government, when I say the government, the bureaucracy, and also from the intellectual class which pervades India, which are the thought leaders of India, we have started normalizing the atrocities committed by the Mughals in India, and we have sort of made them into heroes. So I'll give you an example of my own city. So my city was ruled by the Holkars, which are
Yes.
a Maharashtrian dynasty. There was a great lady
Which you meant indoor, right?
queen, yeah, in Indore,
Indoor. Yes.
Indore, MP. So we had a great queen who
Mm.
was extremely religious. I
Mm.
mean, she was religious to the extent that she single-handedly opened hundreds and hundreds of dharmshalas,
Mm.
um, temples, and she paid for renovation in Varanasi, in the 12 Jyotirlings, many places she did. The irony is that the children of Indore do not know her name,
Mm.
but they know when Mr. Khilji came from wherever he came from.
Yes.
And they know the year when he came, they know the time when he came. So when people do not have a sense of belonging, when you remove that sense of belonging to a certain place, and that has been systematically done through our education system, through the mass media, through pictures. I mean, there was a study done by an individual, and I can send you the link of the study. I should have it in my notes somewhere, where he analyzed a few thousand Hindi motion pictures, and this was specifically to Bollywood. I don't know much about the regional languages, but this gentleman did research on Bollywood, and he looked at 30 years of Indian cinema,
Mm.
and he found out that the villains would mostly have Brahmin names
Mhm.
or higher caste names,
Mhm.
and these people will be indulged in, or they will be indulging in all kinds of nefarious activities while chanting the name of God. Sometimes they have made a fun of some people calling Narayan Narayan or Shiv Shiv, or any, you know, and then these people are then engaged in the most nefarious activities, and they are the worst in the village. One particular motion picture which comes to my mind, and people can correct me because it was a long time back when I saw that motion picture, but it was something called Mother India, which was a big hit in India. So the entire story evolved around a lady and I think her sons, or um, and then she was removed, or you know, her land was forcefully taken over by a lala, which essentially means a merchant who lends money.
Mm.
And that gentleman was portrayed as being a very religious person on the one hand, but then he was sort of a hypocrite,
Mm.
where he was taking God's name in one, you know, in one sentence, and then, you know, saying these nasty things to this woman in the same breath. And so the study which I was referring, it concluded that there was a systematic concentrated effort to demean. Now what that does is it actually takes people, it removes the pride which people feel in their country and the place where they were born.
Self-confidence
And
is, yeah.
yes, and when you don't have that sense of pride of belonging,
Mm.
then what you do is you look outside. And that is one of the reasons why people migrate, because, and I'll tell you frankly myself, that I discovered this too late in my life.
Mm.
If I was taught this when I was a child, when, you know, I was, you know, I was taught in the correct way,
Mm.
whereby I was taught that, you know, this land where where you are born is actually the land of gods, because, you know, God himself has decided to take birth here or appear here. And that would have filled me with pride.
And for the
If I
dharmic
was told,
values, and for the dharmic
yes,
values as well.
yes, yes. But I was taught about Mr. Khilji, Mr. Akbar, Mr. Babar, and who just looted this country. So I guess this can maybe perhaps form the third reason why people migrate.
Yeah. The one point,
The
yeah,
Yeah.
sorry, one point which I would also bring to notice is that what we learn from our historical facts and other incidents, this was started way back in 1840s when this British decided to convert into a complete colony. I mean, before that it was an East India Company which was just ruling some business activities here. When this thing came up, that that famous Macaulay's letter, or I don't remember the person, actually some lord who wrote to the British Parliament telling that these people, the Indian culture is so vast and very rich, and unless we demean them or we make them feel that their culture is much far inferior to our culture, we will not be able to rule this country. So maybe that is the starting point of this entire exercise, what you actually quoted, that it was a long 100 years or so, they did this systematic decay of our own portraying our culture being so inferior. And unfortunately, we are still continuing it even after 70, 80 years of independence.
Well, you are right, but let me take you back actually a few more, a few hundred years.
Mm,
See, when the Muslim invaders came to India, and I'm
mm,
not saying that the Indian kings were perhaps without fault.
yeah, of course.
A lot of them were not ideal kings. They were not followers of Dharma to the extent we would want them to.
Yes.
But once the Muslims came and took over India,
Mm,
they started conversions by force. There is a town in South India, which is the birthplace of Madhvacharya,
yeah.
and correct me if I'm wrong, but there is a village there where they don't celebrate Diwali festival or Dashera festival, one of these festivals,
Hmm.
because a very famous king, a Muslim king of Karnataka, who's lauded for his generosity towards the Hindus. This gentleman actually killed a couple of hundred Brahmins, and he pretty much eradicated the entire village
Yeah.
in one night. And I'm referring to the gentleman called Tipu Sultan.
Tipu Sultan. Yeah.
So the kind of propaganda that has been done over the years, and the 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 modern political parties, at least a few of them, have been active supporters of this monster. And that simply goes to show that our people in India have lost their marbles, as they say. They don't understand and recognize what is good for them and what is bad for them. But then that is the point of this discussion anyway,
Exactly.
that
Exactly.
the leaders of the of any society should know right from wrong. And unless the leaders themselves take pride in their own culture, in their own language, in their own birthplace, and ultimately in their own philosophy or the way of life, it is very difficult for us to stop this migration, because we have essentially, there is no identity. There is an identity crisis going on in young people. They don't know where they belong, what they do, because what is essentially happening now is, what we are doing is, as soon as the child is 2.5 or 3 years old, the first thing which comes to parents' mind is, which school is he going to go to? And they want to send the child to the best school they can afford.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, there is a lady who used to come to work in our home, at my parents' place. She was earning maybe 6 or 8 thousand rupees per month, and 80% of her salary was going in teaching her children, because she was sending them to a school which was charging them whatever 2-3 thousand rupees a month.
Yeah.
So that goes to show that the mentality, the parents also have responsibility. Now, it's not the parents' fault, because this is a multi-generation issue. It's not a new issue. So people who are confused will create more people who are confused,
That's
right?
true.
So the the young child, who are his heroes now? His heroes are television, maybe something on the mobile now, because mobiles are
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
prevalent, and I don't even know the amount of apps there are which influence the young mind.
Of course.
And when we take away these heroes, which we already have, I was commenting on a online blog where someone was vilifying Yudhishthir Maharaj for losing his kingdom
A gambling match.
in a gambling match.
Hmm.
Now, this guy was clueless, and he was just criticizing someone without understanding the entire context, why that happened, how it happened. But then I thought that this is not a problem of this fellow criticizing Yudhishthir Maharaj. It is a problem which goes much deeper, because he has not been taught what is right from
Exactly.
wrong.
The thing which has been taught to us or been imbibed in us is that the Western idea or Western way of functioning seems very structured and solution driven. Yet, if we find the general society or the general way in which people are living, there are so many societal problems. Unsuccessful, they are not able to successfully manage their societal issues. But the perspective that is given is that the rules-based society, they follow the rules and regulations better than India, and it's very structured. So what do you think that in spite of having a very good structural system or a system which is actually working, I would say people are following the rules and regulations, still they are not able to solve many of the societal problems, because many of the societal problems today, the statistics say that the Western world is actually having more societal problems than even Saharan countries, I mean, African countries, or even our own India. I mean, this is the perspective again, which you touched upon very clearly in the first initial of the discussion. So what do you think about this, about the way in which the structural thing has been imbibed in us?
Yeah, I think we have to sort of separate the two things. So when we say a system, so a system could mean so many things. What the Western countries have done quite successfully, obviously the jury is out on it as to how successful they have been, but we'll perhaps park that for a minute now.
Mm.
So we can see that people in general follow certain societal or government laws because the penalties are very harsh and there is almost a guarantee that you will be punished.
Very nice.
And that is the biggest difference between countries where we say that there is a rule of law
Mm.
and where there is no rule of law. Because say for let's just take the example of South Korea, and we'll take the corona example for now.
Mm.
So essentially what South Korea did, and perhaps my numbers are not accurate, but I'll just throw them here, for the discussion, and I can be corrected later
Yeah, it's a
if my
principle.
numbers.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Statistics
think,
can
yeah,
be.
we were talking
Yeah,
about the principle. So
principles. Yeah.
essentially what South Korea did was, when corona came around, they
Mm.
did a small lockdown for a couple of weeks, I think,
Mm.
and then they mandated that anyone who comes out of their home
Mm.
without a mask
Mm.
will be, I think, will be charged some 350 US dollars, roughly equivalent to that amount, which is around 20,000 Indian rupees.
Ooh.
And if you don't do that, then you will be jailed.
Yes.
Now, immediately someone will say, oh, their population is very small. No, actually, their per square kilometer population density is much higher than in India.
Of course.
So that's not a good argument to take. And South Korea very, very quickly eradicated the corona disease. Now, there
Mm.
are two things here. Number one is the people have been trained in such a way to follow the government, but then there is also surety of punishment.
Mm.
But in India, the problem, what we find in not only in India, but most third world countries, is we have laws upon laws upon laws about everything.
Yes.
But then the execution, there is no certainty of punishment,
That's
because you
true.
can get away by bribing pretty much anyone and do anything you want as long as you have the money to do it. And sometimes there are not enough resources with the government to actually do that.
Yes.
Now, let's just take
Uh,
this.
One point
Yeah,
which just I want to add upon to the point. This is a very nice point which you brought in about the harsher punishments and implementation of the rule of land. I would want to quote a small example here. Actually, in the last program which I did, this in the webinar series which I did last time, I slightly touched upon the same point which you brought in here, that how this harsher punishment is a deterrent to many of the ills of the societies. And one point which might also add some value, because from my own experience, having worked in the Middle East for quite many years, I noticed one thing, which is a very actual incident which happened to me, which I would not hesitate to quote here. That in the Middle East, basically Dubai, where I was working, most of the taxi drivers are from India, Pakistan, or Bangladesh or Nepal or some kind of people, and many more are mostly from Pakistani people, which we call them the Pathan people, the people from this part of the Pakistan, which
yes,
are
yes.
bordering the
Northeast
Afghanistan.
Pakistan.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so that's what they generally come from. And today, the perspective that has been given in the media or even in the mainstream media, even abroad, Western media or even our own media, is that the country is completely lawless, or those people are completely lawless, and they are completely rude, very difficult to govern. Now, why I'm quoting this example is that I had one incident which happened to me, that I was traveling in a taxi and I got a phone call. And when I was attending the phone call, I came to the destination. So I paid the man about how much I have to pay. And uh, carelessly, I kept the wallet or the wallet in the car in the taxi and left the place. Now I came to my place. After half an hour, I noticed that I have lost my wallet. Now, what happened is, this was actually, I was working in a bank, so I went to the bank inside. Now, what happened is, within 20 or 30 minutes, my person who is handling the security, or the person who is at the ground floor, he came up to me and gave me the wallet back. Now I asked him, what happened? How did you get it? He told me that the taxi fellow came back and gave your wallet, which was lying in the seat. Now, immediately it struck me that had this incident happened in India or even in Pakistan in their own place, will this fellow bring back that wallet, which is, even though it is not of huge money, probably some cards are there or whatever. The idea of committing a crime or taking the money, even though the chances of him getting caught is very meager, but the punishment, the deterrent, that punishment which is very severe there, makes him feel that even the person might be coming from a society which is lawless, which is very difficult to implement some laws. But that person had the idea that here I am in a place where the laws are very strict, and I am going to be punished very harshly. I'm going to lose my job. I'm going to be put behind bars or even tougher punishments. It's actually acting a deterrent. Today in India, which you brought a nice point here, that even the same corona example is bringing the same point that people are asked to wear masks when they come outside. And the fine for it is say 500 rupees or 1000 rupees or even 100 rupees. How many of them are, I mean, the problem today also is that implementation of laws are also getting very, very difficult. Say the problem might also come from the fact that, police per population is also less or something like that. But the point is very clear. What you brought is very important point, that as a society, when the kingdom was ruling, I go back to the traditional times again. You can correct me from the perspective which I want to present now. That the kingdoms, when we were in the kingdoms there, where the kings were ruling, the punishments were much harsher, and the implementation of the rule of law was much more strict. Today, again coming back to the own democratically elected government, and because we want votes, because the votes speak for everything, there is a laxity in implementation of laws. And why I'm bringing this point up to you is that, which should also happen in the Western world, because they are the torchbearers of the democracy as a concept. So when they who are actually propagating the democracy as a concept, they also need votes. The political party need votes. The police thing can also get back and hit them in sort of votes also. So how they are able to do, and in our country, the implementation of the law is getting very difficult.
Well, there are a few things to sort of go over.
Mm.
Um, it's not apples to apples essentially. Um, the thing is that their systems have taken maybe 350 years in America, perhaps a smaller amount in Europe, but not by much less. So these systems have been around for a good 300 years, and they have gone through the iterations which India is currently going through. And India has achieved a great deal in terms of being democratic, and India has been far, far more democratic because of the old culture which still remains in India despite the concentrated efforts of certain sects and certain individuals and certain parties in India to
Propaganda.
remove
Yeah.
this.
Yes.
And it is an active propaganda even in the NCERT books,
Yes.
which is supposed to be a neutral um, medium of education. There are very much instances where a certain kind of people or a certain people are demonized at the expense of other people. So I think your question is actually very, very broad,
Mm.
and it will take me some time to actually sort of put a few
Oh,
things together, and then I can sort of guide us towards how I think. I just want to go back and want to say that, it's not only the severity of the punishment, but it is also the surety of punishment. So say, for example, in Dubai, if you're caught being a thief, you don't go to jail. You perhaps go to jail, but you also get your hands chopped off.
Yes.
So
They
if you
have
go on
made it a little
the,
more liberal nowadays, but yeah,
yeah,
generally
yeah,
the punishments are
but
harsher. Yeah.
yeah, they used to do that, right?
Yes.
And the Vedic system also had similar punishments.
Yes.
It's not that, in India it wasn't there.
Yeah.
Now the way India was structured, we have to understand this. And the great Indian politician Gandhi, he touched on this because he understood. And I by no means I'm a fan of Gandhi, or I'm not, I'm just quoting him for this specific thing because this is where I think he was right. He said that India has to go back to villages.
Yes.
And actually, the entire world used to be like this. The entire world, prior to this modern technology, which has made doing a lot of things possible, the entire world used to run in self-contained units, which we call villages.
Decentralized units. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, the reason why the villages worked and why the modern system, regardless of what kind of governance system it has, it could be democracy, it could be quasi-democracy like they have in China, or dictatorship like you have in the Middle East, all of them will have similar problems. They're trying to solve them in different ways, but those solutions are not going to work. The reason why they're not going to work is, okay, let me tell you a principle first. The principle of complexity is that things that work on a smaller scale may not necessarily work on a larger scale. This is the essential thing about complexity.
Yes.
Right?
It works in business also.
Yes, in business also. So a business which is a small business, which you call a scalable business and an unscalable business, some businesses are scalable and some businesses are not scalable.
Yeah.
When it comes to society, you can scale infrastructure by, and we won't get into how the environment is actually getting worse and worse and worse every year because of what we are doing. But let's just park that for a minute. But what we are trying to do with the society is, and the problem in the Western world is coming essentially because of this. And India is still, to a certain extent, because of our culture, because of our tradition, we have sort of not borne the brunt of it at this point in time. But we are getting there very, very quickly.
Yeah.
So what has happened is, when you remove this self-contained unit, then when you try to take the self-contained unit and then expand it, it creates, the complexity becomes multifold. In a village, it was essentially a self-contained unit. So it had what you called a landlord or zamindar, which are very much vilified again, but those guys, if they follow dharma, they are perhaps very good people, or they should be very good people. Then you have a small, consortium of people who will defend the village from, attacks.
Yeah.
And then you would have farmers who will grow enough food for everyone in the village. And then you would have different people providing different services.
Yeah.
So what we have done is, we have sort of tried to take this concept and then try to make it into a city. But what happens is, the amount of interactions, just from a complexity theory standpoint, they become so complex because your dependencies increase. Like, say, for example, in our city, in Indore, our water comes from 180 kilometers away. So they pump the water 180 kilometers away so that people in this city can drink water.
Yeah.
Or they have drinking water. So 1 day or 2 days, if those machines go bust, the entire city is unlivable.
Yeah.
Right? So what we have done is, now if we had small blocks of villages all along the 180 kilometers,
Hmm.
we won't have this singular dependency on one pumping station to
Hmm.
provide water for the entire city.
Hmm.
And what has happened is, in a village, what they would previously do is, to solve this problem, is the landlord, because he controls all the land, he will allocate places for digging ponds and wells and so on and so forth, so that rainwater is stored and it is utilized all over the year. And the Western world is facing a similar problem. It's not that they don't have these problems, it's just that they have the resources
Hmm.
to actually, in many places they have the resources to actually overcome this. But a recent example which comes to my mind is Cape Town in South Africa.
And a huge water crisis.
They had or they still have an ongoing water crisis, and which will continue. So
Hmm.
the only solution, I guess, I want to go back to the point which you previously made. India is still India, and the my firm belief is that our forefathers, our ancestors, were not fools like we are taught nowadays. They were not idiots who did not understand things. They were actually highly intelligent people who
Hmm.
chose to live in a certain way
Hmm.
because they knew that this is the path of least resistance.
Hmm.
See, there are two kinds of smart people, right? One smart person is, he will try to tackle a challenge and try to find a solution. The other kind of person is who knows that if I just avoid this problem, then I can just get on with my life.
Correct.
So if you
Not make,
establish a,
yeah.
yeah, if
Intelligence
you,
also is that you don't make things more complex.
exactly.
Hmm. Uh,
So
yeah, see, the point which I
the
also want to add, sorry, I mean, interrupting
yeah,
you. Point which I want to add here is also that you brought this concept of the swarajya, which this Gandhi brought in, was actually a very viable and a valid idea, even in a present day. I mean, a modern, whatever we call it, an advanced civilization, or, we have reached an epitome or pinnacle of our living. Still, it applies very good even to this present day. The migration, or what we call a migration from the rural backdrop to a village or to a city center, which is happening quite drastically in many countries, even in China to a many great extent, even South Korea, what you mentioned, Australia also perhaps. All these countries had huge migration issue, which people previously used to live in some, I would call a countryside, as they call there, and they came back to the city center asking for cities for looking for some jobs, which are basically service-oriented jobs. Implementation of law or implementation of a system of disciplining the people would have been much easier. You brought a nice point that it would have been much easier in a village setup because it is small, because it is localized, because the sarpanch or whatever we call the person who is a leader or who has been the leader of the pack of people, he actually, and they have a custom that because I have to live with the same people here, I know everybody of them. So tomorrow, if I do some mistake, I will be like a stigma will be attached to my family. That also made acted as a deterrent for doing some of the petty things which today people do in cities, because you have migrated, you don't know anybody, and you are free to do whatever you want to do. There is no overseeing. And the other point which I want to bring here is also, maybe you can correct me from the statistics which I saw somewhere here, that most of the Western countries, I would call the westernized countries, because Western countries might not be, it might be misnomer, because even Australia is not Western. So westernized countries, the implementation of the law, which we were discussing earlier, because of the harsh punishment conviction rate, which you brought in, the conviction rate being higher, is also creating a problems of filling up the prisons more. The prison population in the westernized countries as a percentage of the population is much higher than in India. Today, if the same rule of law has to be implemented in India, in Indian cities, I would say, then your prison will be much more flooded than even today. Even today, Indian prisons are much more holding capacity more than they have been built for. So what do you think about that? Because once you implement this tougher laws, maybe a cycle will come, or what do you think? Say maybe the people will, over a period of time, they have been doing such kind of petty crimes, they will continue doing, the conviction rate will be more, they will be filled in prison. Then over a period of time, as you correctly said, they might act as a deterrent for doing some more mistakes. What do you think like that? What do you perceive?
I think your point is very valid, and India would actually face this problem. The higher conviction rates, again, see, it's the law, it's the interpretation of the law. See,
That's true.
the modern law is very complicated. So, you have this entire cohort of lawyers, and you have, barristers and solicitors, and who God knows, what other titles people have. And essentially, the system can be gamed
Yeah.
by way of, not knowing anyone and not being in a small village, or not knowing people who you are interacting with. People tend to do things which they should not do. It also goes to the point which I brought earlier, which is about the education system. Now, if you teach children about, so many different things, but you don't teach them how to behave, how to
Discipline.
live,
Yes.
then these problems are not going to go away. So the the point being that these problems are going to continue regardless of which system you follow.
Mm.
The solution will come when you have at least 2 or 3 generations of children who then become parents, and then they train, then they teach their children about values, ethics, and how to live just like human beings. Forget about any spiritual concepts or spiritual life, or anything like that. Just the basics, and being decent human beings,
Being a human first, yeah.
being a human. But then I go back to my point of meritocracy, where
Mm.
the Vedic system, or the Vedic caste system as they call it, the Vedic caste system was a system which was plainly based on meritocracy.
Mm.
It had nothing to do with your birth. You could be born in any section of the society. As long as you had merit, you could transcend that position, while actively acknowledging that you are born into a certain situation because of your past karmic work. And it is very simple to explain to people how karma works. Say, for example, you have, everyone has gone through a school, and you have this annual exam.
Yes.
So now, if I don't study for the whole year, then what I will do is I'll perform very poorly in the exam, which means when my result comes, I'll not have good grades. And then based on those grades, I will be given the choice to do something else next year, right?
Yes.
So similarly, in our lives, whatever actions we take, and whatever actions we have taken in our past lives, they will give us the opportunity to do a certain, or play a certain part in the society when we are born again.
That's very true.
So the Vedic system was a meritocracy system. It wasn't something that is, what you say, that is not something which it is made out to be nowadays, which is, a very rudimentary, orthodox, and a foolish system.
The same set of problems which the Western countries are facing, where these kind of people who are from the very poor background, or a background which is not conducive for them for any so-called development, they are facing a lot of societal issues. And the same set of people who are migrating in our country from villages to cities are facing the same issue.
The problem is actually not so simple. The problem is the lack of training and the lack of understanding about what the human life is meant to be.
Very important.
See, in India, there is, and even in a lot of third world countries, there is a lot of poverty. Poverty is not the cause of crime. We should completely divorce ourselves from the idea that poverty equals to crime. I mean, if poverty was equal to crime, then India, we would, these poor people in India would be killing people with any money every single day.
Yeah, sorry, one small point which I want to add, not to obstruct your flow of thought. When I went to US, when I was working before, when I went to US a couple of times, what I observed is that the so-called poverty is much more prevalent or much more dominant when you see in those cities than in India. Is that in any of the US cities, in any of the traffic signal you stand in or you wait for the signal, you will find more beggars, more homeless people, and more people who are knocking on your windows asking for some help, and relatively much lesser in any of the metropolitan city in India in any traffic signal. This is number one. So the poverty as a criteria seems to be much more higher in those countries than in our countries. And you made a very valid point of crime committed by the poverty-stricken man, which is not happening in India. And what about your Australian experience? Do you agree with this, or it's a observation which might be corrected?
No, this is, I think we are, our biases are coming into play if we do this. See, the point I'm trying to perhaps communicate is that the 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 sense of entitlement is what is the cause of the problem.
Mm,
What is happening is, in the Western country, people are being told over and over and over again that regardless of who you are, what your qualification is, you should have the same life as the guy who's driving a Ferrari.
mm,
And that is what is the cause of resentment. And this can be cured by understanding our position in relation to God
mm,
and in relation to the karmic system. I mean, if you're talking about solutions,
mm,
this is a very, very viable solution, because when we understand ourselves, when we understand our position
mm,
in relation to everything,
mm,
then a lot of the resentment goes away. Playing field was level, you won't resent that person to
mm,
the extent that you want to go and kill him. Yes, you will resent him because jealousy is a part of, I guess, the human psyche.
mm,
When we are not, when we don't have pure thoughts, jealousy will be a part of it. But it won't drive you mad, where you will start and go, start throwing stones at that person's office or house or whatever, which is what is happening with this Black Lives Matter. And the excuse they are using is that these people are underprivileged, they have been ostracized, and they have been what you say, discriminated against.
mm.
But when you simply understand that whatever is happening to you, part of it, and I'm not saying that the other person who's committing the, or who's the perpetrator of the act, is not at fault,
Mm,
you know be that as it may.
mm,
What is happening to us is happening because of our karma, something which we have done previously. Because,
mm.
as I said, you cannot pass a test in flying colors if you haven't studied for the whole year. So your actions would make you eligible to do something.
That's very true.
And the way karma works is, sometimes even if you do the actions, and this is where it gets tricky, you may not get the desired result.
Yes. And that is where this dharmic way of living comes in. See, our
Yes.
tradition has been in such a way arranged or been designed that people have been brought up in a dharmic mindset that, what I deserve, I will get it. I touched upon a concept called spiritual economics. And this is what I perhaps want to do a future session with you. I mean, because we are running short of time. What I have actually kept some more topics which I can discuss with you. One such topic
Mm,
is called the spiritual economics,
mm,
where the economic mindset, how this bigger families have become smaller families, how the marketing companies have made us into a mindset that the smaller families are much better, and how this private ownership of this what I call is a right-based society rather than a duty-based society, because these are some of the concepts which I probably want to discuss with you further in another session. And the other point also, which I want to touch upon, is the concept that how the can the village economy can be made much more lucrative, because that's your field of interest, and I hope you must have done a lot of research on that, because the how the village economy can be made more lucrative, so that the people who are already there, or even people like you who are from living in a city like Indore and migrating to a far more advanced life to Australia, and coming back and trying to set up some system where the village life is much better. So that is another, these are some of the things which probably we can take up in the
Yes,
further session.
future
So
session.
because this is what I have a plan. Do you want to tell anything further about this, what we discussed today, Mr. Bharat?
No, I think we have covered a lot of things, but as I think the topic is so wide and
Yeah.
it requires, I think, if we were to do justice to this, we could speak about it for about an year, and still we won't be short of material to actually
That's very
um,
true.
tell people listening to this podcast
Yeah,
about the things they should think about.
correct.
Now, there is a very important thing which we are trying to do here. We're trying to ask the right questions. We are not trying to convert anyone or trying to change how they think about things. But our job, based on our realizations, is to actually ask or present the right questions so that people can find answers to those questions themselves
Very true.
and
Very true.
come to their own conclusions based on the information we present.
It's just a food for thought. See, some of the problems which we discussed even today, or even I have been discussing in the last few sessions, or as you correctly said, it's much more complex. We have made it much more complex because of multiple reasons. So we are trying to find some solutions, or find some way of thinking, whether a traditional approach, or like what
Hmm.
you said, a dharmic based society would be much better place to solve many of the problems, if not all of the problems. That is the idea behind this entire exercise of this webinar. So thank you so much for joining today. I hope to catch you another day for another session on some of the topics which are still pending, which I want to further get your perspective on, having been traveled much across the globe. Thank you
Oh,
so
good.
much. Thank you
Thank
so
you
much
very
for your.
much. Thank
Thank
you
you.
for your time.
Thank you.
Okay.